perfect.
Or
How are you?
good. I'm fine. I'm just actually I just came back from a family gathering, so it was just like all over. Okay. So just from a family gathering. Cool. So we are live.
Good. You're allowed to meet now.
Yes, I will start the broadcast. Okay. We're just gonna. I'm just gonna allow Filippo people to join us, and we will start in 5 minutes exactly. How's everything at your end?
All good. All good. Busy period, but in a good sense. So
Good. That's great.
yeah. Looking forward to some holidays as well, as
I think
summer is approaching, and I mean, you know, you don't really get the real summer in London, no?
I agree. We're all waiting for that anxiously.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, until they open the airports again and the borders, it's going to be hectic until then. Work.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be intense, I guess.
And
so you're able to fly at all or not?
Not to all destinations, actually, from Doha or from Qatar, not to all destinations. I mean, it's somehow limited.
I see.
Yeah, it is limited. And what about in the UK?
Well, there are flights. They may cancel them at times. They are reduced at the moment. I was checking to fly back to Italy. There are flights, but way less than before at the moment. And so I'm not sure. I don't know of many people traveling. I know some people traveling to Europe mainly, and they managed. It was easy. And so I guess, yeah, we also used to have the quarantine up to 2 weeks ago. So if you were flying in, you would have had to stay like in quarantine for 2 weeks at home without going out at all. But then they removed that. So now it's easier because you don't need to take into consideration that if you fly out, then you come back and then you have to deal with that thing.
Oh, I see. So, Filippo, we have some people on board. For everyone joining us, welcome on board. We're going to be starting at 7:30 Doha timing. We have Filippo with us, and shortly I will start with the introduction, and we will start at 7:30 exactly. So you can share with us where you are from until we start. And we are honored to have you once again, Filippo.
Thanks a lot for inviting me. Looking forward. I come from Italy, as you may guess from my accent, I guess. I studied there. I was born in Bologna, which is in the center north of the country, and did my grad studies there. And I worked there for some time. And then I moved to London in 2015, which is already 5 years ago. And since then, I have been living in London and never moved out of there.
That's wonderful.
So, yeah, it's still nice. Still, I like the city.
Yeah.
Plenty to do. Then, yeah, I mean, I studied in Bologna, did my bachelor. Well, it was actually a master's degree. Was a way between engineering and architecture. But then towards the thesis, the last year, I moved into computational design. And after that, few experiences led me into product design mainly. So I'm more between architecture and product design than I would be between architecture and engineering, I would say. So nice. Also architecture, the project I work on are generally very small scale or experimental or teaching and everything.
Wonderful. So for those who just joined us, we're going to be starting, as I said before, at 7:30. Filippo just gave an introduction about himself very briefly, and I will reassure that shortly. He is joining us currently from the UK, and we will start in a minute time. So for those of you who joined us, you may share in the chat where you are from, and that is mainly it. We're just going to wait for another minute, Filippo.
Yeah, sure.
Actually, I took one workshop with Filippo back in 2014, and I was so impressed by his activities. So I thought, why not bring in Filippo once again?
That's great. I think it was a it was a great experience, that workshop. I think that overall the visit in school that year was incredibly successful, also compared to other programs. I think it was good both for the teaching and the social environment. All of us had a lot of fun, I think.
I fully agree. We have people from Qatar, we have people from Istanbul with us on board today, Filippo, and we have Sudanese architect as well with us. Welcome on board, guys, and good evening to you all. It's 7:30 here in Doha, and it is our 5th episode of Architecture's Entertainment Tonight. For those of you who don't know, our guest for tonight is Filippo Nassetti. As you all know, our interview comprises of 10 questions with our signature pick and tick interludes. So marking the end of our questions, we will be taking a few of your Q&A for Filippo to answer. The interview will be about an hour long, so we will just have about 2 minutes for each question, and Filippo will answer them. We have the shared structure of our questionnaire in the chat for your reference. Filippo, please allow me to introduce you once again to our audience. Filippo is an Italian architect. He is also the co-founder of MHOX. It's a European-funded research practice and startup. It focuses on the design of radical artifacts and wearable products through computational techniques and 3D printing. In 2015, Filippo, you joined Zaha Hadid Architects, and you were initially part of the code team, and then you actually, in 2019, you joined the Zaha Hadid Design team. So his focus there was mainly on small-scale research projects, from product design to experimental sculptures and installations. And since 2016, he's been teaching at the UCL in London, mainly as part of the B Pro Master's Degree Program, which is the Urban Morphogenesis Lab. And many of his solo work has been published and exhibited internationally, whether at the Design Museum in London or Centre Pompidou in Paris, or even many of his works has been published at the New York Times or even at Design. So Filippo, please, I'll give you the mic if you'd like to say anything before I start.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and I think that you were very comprehensive in your introduction. So I think we can jump into the questions right away.
Okay, so let me start with the question, Filippo. For those of you, as I said, he is an architect and you are also a computational designer, Filippo. So can you tell us please more about how these two domains come intact and if being an architect is actually a prerequisite to complement computational design?
Not necessarily, although there is a tight relationship. We can say that historically, in a way, in the last 20 years, it was within architecture that computational design made major advancements as a practice, as a method, as culture, as reference for that. So the relationship is tight because of that, but the scope of computational design is not necessarily bound to architecture. So you can apply the method and the culture, the techniques, the sensibility, whatever, to any other domain in which there can be a purpose. There is a lot in product design, in engineering. They be a thinking applied to any type of creativity, like graphics and video and so on. In fact, I mean, this may be related also to more general artistic practices, also like what can be intended as computer art or code art, generative design. These are terms that are used less than computational design in the architectural discourse, but there is a tight relationship with that. So the idea is that you use, the very general idea is that you use a set of tools which relate to digital computational techniques, algorithms, and everything to empower your design process with. But the scope is distinct from architecture itself. So potentially the two things can also take different directions.
I agree.
Still nowadays, there is a lot of the key centers for research. I think they are pretty much bound to architecture still. Like if you look at the Academy of Product Design, they don't really have a research center in computational design for creativity. and same for graphics. So still most of the research is done within architecture, I would say. But there are lots of architects that spin off and do other things in other domains.
Yes, which is like you mainly.
Yeah.
Like Filippo mainly. So after my next question, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. It's a set of different standards that are put together under one domain or one agenda. And after my next question, so you are currently teaching at the UCL, as I mentioned earlier, and you are a member of the Urban Morphogenesis Lab, teaching an urban design master degree program. So for those of you who don't know, the program actually focuses on mobilizing different forms of intelligence and technological evolutions such as AI or nanotechnology or machine learning, where there is a sense of ambiguity and estrangement, which is something I'm inspired by Filippo, in the urban context. So can you tell us more about that and how it contributes actually to expand students' imaginations and creativity levels?
Well, first of all, there are cultural roots in the program, which are those of computation, computational design within architecture. And the thing is that it's a research program. Mm-hmm. So every year, every new season, we try to enrich the program with new things that may fit those cultural premises. So in that sense, artificial intelligence, machine learning are things that we're looking at right now, but also other forms of biological intelligence, digital tools in general. So also like keeping ourselves updated with software and everything. We do believe that generally students come, many of them without a background in this type of research. So for them, it's quite a feeling of estrangement at the beginning, which is also good because it sets the ground for a completely new type of practice to be initiated and incepted into people's mind. So in that sense, I think that in terms of learning, the fact that you suddenly move out of your comfort zone into something which is completely different is very enriching. Yes. Given that there is enough time to let the thing grow. I mean, clearly, if you just move into a place which is completely different from the one you were before, and you don't have enough time to pick up things, then it's more the damage than the good. But given enough time, and the program is 1 year long, and there is enough time, there is time to get into the new mode, so to speak. And then the more you go on, the more it's up to the person to see how that integrates with the background, with the thing that he or she wants to do, and so on. So, but I think it's good for a 1 year master program to go into a completely different place. But even for other things, if I were to go back to learning within a program right now, I would look for something quite different from what we do.
Ah, that's nice.
Yeah, because I think that's the most productive thing. Like being challenged with something completely different. It forces you more to adapt. I think that in terms of learning, there would be more to get from something different from my background. At this point in my professional development, clearly it's different if someone is just started with computational design or wants to get specific knowledge into that, or within any other domain, then it's better to go within a program that is suiting that specific interest.
Absolutely. I mean, I saw that some of the research program in 2017 or in 2018, it tackled spider webs of some sort. So this is something, the estrangement is like really interesting for students, as you said, to come out of their comfort zone. I absolutely agree with you, Filippo. Thank you for sharing this. My third question is, so you've been the co-founder of, I'm going to just say the acronym, it's MHOX, which is MHOX, with Andres on Pirelli. So you focus mainly on generative design and 3D printables of mass customized wearable products that are absolutely insane. Allow me to say that. So through scanning, you scan mainly the human's anatomical body and you come up with fashion and medical products like the Collagene mask or even the generative orthoses. So can you share with us the purpose and the functionality of such products and generative designs?
Yeah, absolutely. So MHOX, now we are moving into it's the end of the 7th year, I think, if I remember well. We started in 2012. So yeah, 7 or 8 years. And at the beginning, it was a startup project funded by the European Union. And we were working, it was the hype of 3D printing back then. And we were working specifically on how you can design systems of mass customization of products that are to be produced with 3D printing. So at the beginning, our specific focus was that, and it became quite natural for a set of events to link it to 3D scanning of the human body, and we did a number of projects that were dealing with that. So between 2012 and 15, we investigated something like 5 to 10 products, in which we were moving from concept to development to commercialization of them. So trying to understand how such product, which is clearly experimental, it's a research-oriented design, how that can be developed and brought onto the market. And in that sense, we work on a number of projects. So the masks were mainly geared toward focusing a research direction, I would say, that out of which were then stemming out many other type of projects which were more commercial or oriented to functionality, like the orthoses that you mentioned, or prosthesis design, we did a few, and other medical products. We were engaged for some time back then with respiratory masks, customized, and now are really popular. But that's something that we work a lot for some time. Then in a way, the conditions under which we were working as startup kind of expired, I would say. Like after 3 years of experimentation, we came to the end of a program of research that we set up, and we decided to make some changes back then. And then that's when I moved to London and everything, and now MHOX stays more as a general collaborative practice between Alessandro and myself. Alessandro Zamparelli is my partner in MHOX. We founded it together, and we still work together on some experimental projects. So like the masks that you mentioned are still for us a way to boil down some experimentation in a finished outcome. Like if I'm trying some new design techniques, like working with different type of morphologies of shapes or techniques to control formation, then generally I tend to crystallize them into the design of the mask. Like I would say, okay, I'm doing this research. I want to get to a point in which I can show how the system works and everything. I need a case study. What I would do a mask at the moment, because it's a kind of fil rouge between my design work.
I see. That's very interesting, Filippo, because most of the masks that you've done are actually influenced by morphogenesis and such natural phenomena as you were mentioning. I mean, for those of you who are asking why there are no visualizations like Ali, we are sharing the link. The purpose of this is an interview, so I just shared the link of MHOX for their reference. So off to my next question, Filippo. So you've started with Zaha Hadid Architects back in 2015, and you were part of the Zaha Hadid Computation and Design team, which is the ZH code. And as a designer, you focused on the application of computational methods and emerging technologies to small-scale innovative projects. So can you share with us one of the most exciting projects that you've enjoyed working on the most?
I think that one of the most interesting one was 3 collections of sportswear for Zaha Hadid Design, which were quite experimental because we were working with 3D automated knitting. So how you can control digitally the knitting of garments. Yes. And the idea was to relate the patterns in the knitting to to a mapping of the body, and how different parts sweat in a different way, or strengthen in different ways, or perform differently, than how you can arrange the structure of the garment that you're wearing according to that. So in a way, that was kind of a design exercise, which was very similar to a lot of consideration that we did for the masks and for everything, with the difference that it was not 3D printing, but it was knitting. So that was quite exciting, because it was a way to continue a certain type of research within a different framework. And I mean, you know that anyway, the framework is the one of Zaha, so it's kind of a different aesthetics in a way, but also still a very experimental place to do things. So that was a very exciting project.
That is nice. That is nice. I mean, knitting is a different scope where one would go into details and would study all the implications into that. So for those of you who are interested to know more, the link has been shared in the chat as well. So in 2019, you moved to a different domain. I mean, I know it's part of what you've just mentioned, but you moved to Zaha Hadid Design. So from ZHA to ZHD, from Zaha Hadid Architects to Zaha Hadid Design as a senior architect. So what notable changes did you encounter in your career and expertise during this shift from ZHA to ZHD?
I was interested in working, keeping the focus on the product scale.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry?
It was your choice.
Yeah, it was my choice. It was my choice. It came naturally in a way because I started in code, which is the computational design group within the company, because of my background, and the code works on, or used to work in a quite varied scope of project, like very different type of project, from product to installation to architecture to competition and everything, wherever there is an interest for computation. And I tend to fall more and more into the product, the product scale or small scale installation, because it was fitting more with my background and my interest. But still being that group means that, yes, you can focus more on something, but I really wanted to work full time on the product. So now I moved from like being in a computational design group with a focus on product. Now I'm in a product design group with a focus on computation. So that's the difference, if that can explain. And I'm liking it better because it's okay that you can work at transcolor at different scales and everything, but at some point you also need to reduce a bit the transcolority. It gets too much. Like, you can switch between scale, absolutely, and I recommend it, but not too much. I think that really moving from the master plan to the jewelry design, and you can do it for some time, it's very instructive, but also at some point you also want, there are some scales that you like better than others, and I think that's true for everyone. Some people like to work at the urban scale, some people like to work at the scale of the jewel or the object, some people like to work more architecturally, and I wanted to work on small scale stuff in general, from the small product to the, I don't know, something the size of an interior maybe, but still a relatively small one. And that's because I like the level of control that you can achieve over that scale. Like, as a designer, I think it's very rewarding because you really get into the details of everything. The teams are smaller in general, so there is less coordination, there is less negotiation, and also the type of design that you can do morphologically can be more extreme. Like, you know, in architecture, at the end of the day, if you're aiming to do build work, you have a lot of constraints onto the shape that are less present at the product scale.
I fully agree. I mean, it eventually depends on the individual and their interests. But I mean, going into product design would be definitely, it requires more getting into details and more into the intricate detailing, as you mentioned. Thank you for sharing once again, Filippo. And off to my last question in this, in our first category. As far as I know, and as far as I remember, you are always inspired, and usually you are inspired usually by human body evolutions and natural phenomena and organic natural forms. So how do you think biology and anatomy are somehow related to your field of expertise, having said that you work with human bodies almost all the time with product design?
Yeah, I think that there is a relationship, but it's like, I would say there are many influences. Mm-hmm. Like, I still consider myself fully a designer, not like half and half other things. But I think that there are lots of influences. Like, the influence of biology is mainly related to a certain type of aesthetics, which I investigate. But also there are other influences. Like, I'm influenced a lot by science fiction also, I would say.
Yes. It is.
I think it's very relevant because at the end, when you do design, there is a point in which you may want, or you feel you need to set your own agenda, and then that's the point in which some type of personality needs to kick in to make the agenda specific. And I think that that is really driven by your interest at that point. So what is that makes your own agenda specific? What are your influences? What are your interests? And like, for me, certainly, like, biological forms are a reference in many sense, as much as science fiction, as much as art also is a big influence.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I mean, once again, it depends on individuals' interests and how you want to specialize and go into the details of things based on your specialty and your expertise. So, Filippo, we are off. We are done from our first section, and now I would like to move to our entertaining pick and take with our first part. And I would like to ask you to provide us with one quote.
One quote. I have one in mind. Just 1 second that I need to find the correct wording.
Please go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, it's a quote from the it's a quote from the Bible. I'm not that fervent believer, but I like the quote pretty much. I want to make sure that I find the right one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there is a time to sow and there is a time to reap.
Sorry, again, there is a time to
sow, to seed, to plant a seed, and the time to harvest what has been grown.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Filippo.
It's honestly, it's one of the most influential quotes. There is something that's something relevant to say. I think that our culture is very fast-paced always, but the influence of time on the thing you do, it's still very relevant. Like there is a value which I think should be like a virtue which should be cultivated is patience, I think.
Nice, very nice. I mean, it's inspirational somehow, and I mean, it gives motivation for one to work after what they want. I just would just like to remind our audience that if you have any questions, please go ahead and fill them up in the Q&A. We're going to answer them at the end of our interview. And Filippo, back to you. We are going to move to our next section, which is pandemic versus influence on career development, or I would like to have your opinion on that. So in your opinion, what are the most optimistic, rather positive global implications that COVID-19 has left behind, in your opinion?
Well, one thing that caught me, well, there was much discussion onto that. I think that in terms of direct ecological implication, we lived a few months with a very strong reduction of pollution, and that was quite visible and quite strong, and that was a consequence which was quite positive. I think that also rethinking, I mean, I don't like the idea of being close at home all the time, but I also have to say that I rested a lot in this month. Being forced to stay at home, I slept like I hadn't in a decade. That was a major gain out of that, and I think that many other people, if they were lucky enough not to be anxious for people being sick or themselves being sick, I think they may have enjoyed the rest of that. The month before, I was traveling like crazy. Like I was teaching in London, teaching in Innsbruck, going around for other things, traveling for projects, and I think that's something which is consuming yourself and the environment around you. So if there is one thing that I hope went through, is that there is not really the need to consume that much in terms of movement, in terms of things and everything. I'm not envisioning a future in which people stay at home all the time, but I think that maybe a different balance can be pursued for that. There's no need to spend half of your life on a plane just to do something that you would be able to do connected like that. And connected to that, I also think that there was like many initiatives like this one stemmed out of COVID-19 and everything. So I think there were different, it's like the technology was there, but the custom was not there yet. Like we were not accustomed to do things remotely, while it was completely positive. And I think that that's something actually positive that came out. And I think if people can connect and interrelate, collaborate, do initiatives, with a far lower consume of resources, that's a great gain out of the situation.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree, because COVID has made us experiment with new things that we haven't done before, whether working from home, working remotely, or even staying at home at first. And the environmental implications has been drastic. As you said, they were positively impacted. So to my last question in this section, as you know, digital fashion has proved to be very handy, fast, and functional nowadays, especially with the new production of designs that were handy for public health emergencies, with the mask shields and the face masks, and so on and so forth. So in what ways do you think that COVID-19 in specific has inspired and motivated most generative designers?
I think there was, I mean, many people, Alessandro also, even Alessandro did a tool to customize masks for like people, doctors and other people working in the hospital and everything. I think that especially at the beginning, there was a big drive to do something useful and to help somehow. So many people felt that, and people started thinking how they can use their skills to do so. So in that sense, I think that was something interesting. At the same time, it didn't go much beyond those tools, those type of equipment, and I think that it dried out a bit after 1 month. So I don't know. I also think that sometimes you need time to see things. Back to what I was saying regarding time. So more than what came out on the VIN, like in the first 2 months, I think it would be interesting to see in 1 or 2 years which are the changes which are really coming into place, because maybe some ideas are out there and still need to be developed. Like there are some things which are interesting. Like a friend of mine is working, I mean, he's not the only one, but is working on this idea of doing rock concerts remotely, by connecting in virtual reality, and which, I don't know, it's a bit weird, to be honest, because there is something nice in the physical presence, but at the same time, this opens up a very wide space for experimentation. And another thing I was thinking, like online exhibitions. I think that's something, I don't know how it would be an art gallery which is completely digital, completely virtual, in which you can experience a completely different type of space and time relationship to your body in the digital environment. If we were able to push the technology and the fact that everybody is connecting in virtual reality to that point, which we are not there yet. But I was thinking, like, even like, I don't know, students exhibition, like if you're doing an exhibition at the end of the year, you may want, you have the chance to present a project like the project of a building in 1-to-1 scale, with people going around the 3D model instead of seeing some scale models or prints on the wall and everything. I think that's a great potential for that.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. There has been new ideas flourishing everywhere with new designs and new ideas, such as the exhibitions that you've just mentioned and many others. I mean, even these new productions to help public health were magnificent. So this is my last question for the pandemic section. And now off, I would like to move again to our pick and tick. And this time I would like you to share one advice for future generations, Filippo.
Take your time to understand what you want to do and to cultivate your interest. There is time for that. I mean, you're always thinking, you push to think that you need to finish things on time, be the fastest, move on quickly. But with hindsight, I think that the time spent on focusing, cultivating your interest, understanding what you want to do, experiment on things with the risk of failing, the experimentation, that's something which is paying off a lot at the end of the day.
I mean, I absolutely agree with you, Filippo. I mean, even for me as an architect, it was not easy to discover what I wanted. But I mean, with time, you become more aware, and you explore more and experiment more. So taking your time and being patient, as you always mentioned, is wonderful. Okay, so after my last two questions for this interview relating to future developments, how do you envision, Filippo, the future of urban cities and the urban fabric in a few years' time?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Sorry?
From your expertise, that's all I said.
That's an interesting question, because first thing one would think that the implication of COVID and everything. To be honest, I'm not seeing at the moment really an impact on the city. Okay, things have been in lockdown, but then they reopen and they are as before. Okay, there is a bit of social distancing, but this will be forgotten in a couple of months, I think, unless there is a second wave or more waves, or the thing is coming back to stay, so people will have to plan. I think that what is going to change, well, at the same time, we need to see how this work from home is going to develop. Yeah. Because it just becomes more of a practice, then there is less need for office spaces and buildings and everything. So that may trigger changes. And still, I think that maybe not a few years, but more in a few decades, maybe even less. I mean, the climate change is going to kick in at a deeper level, I think. So that's something that may trigger more changes in that. Radical changes, probably, in the way in which the cities are built and experienced and lived. I cannot, okay.
Sorry, I muted it. I like the way that you're tackling, I mean, different aspects and you're bringing in different ideas for us this evening. Thank you for sharing once again, Filippo. I would just like to remind the audience that we are marking the end of our interview, so please go ahead and share your Q&A so that we can answer them after this question. Filippo, one last question for you from my end, and then our pick and tick, and after that to Q&A. Do you think that architects and our profession as architects will be required, or we will be required, to specialize in different fields, including machinery, including chemistry, biology, or anatomy in the future, to better compete with future advancements and developments? Because I mean, our profession is expanding so fast. We have to keep up with this fast pace.
I mean, what I think is that the architectural design method is very flexible. So architects or people with a background in architecture are able to adapt to very different design setups, so to speak, or frameworks. So it's easy to transition to product design, it's easy to transition to other forms of design or other forms of jobs. So in that sense, I think there is a lot of flexibility into that. I also think there is lots of production which tends to fall in a space which is not really easily, cannot be easily put into categories, so to speak. Something which is not always clear where it falls, and in that sense is something where sometimes there is a good potential for research. So I do believe that certain kind of architecture will stay as we know it, of course, but I also think that for people which are more experimental, the fact that they make more hybrid practice, they expand to other fields, that's something which is more and more possible, and also is something which is more accepted culturally. Like it's not anymore a time in which the profession is that fixed as it used to be. There is not anymore, I think, the architect with the capital A. Maybe there is the doctor with the capital D, yes, but for creatives, it's more accepted that people do different things or transition to something. Clearly, you cannot move in and out too many things, but you may take the chances to do something hybrid at a certain point, and that becomes more common, accepted.
Wonderful, 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 wonderful. Thank you again, Filippo, for sharing. I mean, I am inspired by most of the things that you've shared. One last pick and tick, I promise, and then we're going to move to Q&A. So this is actually my favorite, because I would like you to share your insights about a picture that I'm showing you. So it's the reflect. And this is my image of the day. I would like
Okay,
to.
so we see a city, and the city, there is a river, which that kind of turn reminds me of the Thames a bit. So it may be as well London, and then there is a dome around it, and there are these big spikes around. The color tend to make you think that it's quite of the dystopic future, something that is potentially like a city, like I don't know, like Cyberpunk City or Blade Runner City or something. I'm really wondering what are those spikes? What's the functionality of those spikes? Because that is the most interesting element. Like if I were to be there, that's would be where I would go and try to explore. Also, there is a lot of detail. So I think that there are many bubbles around, many like small domes.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So it's like spotting the details, no? And but I really wonder, like, I mean, is it something? Is this like a dome that is covering a city on Earth, or is rather like a ball floating in space into which there is a city detached from the rest of the world?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this is the city under a dome, so it's like more or less I mean, it's how the cities will become more I mean, there will be more surveillance, and there will be more control over the cities that we are living in. It's actually the city of ENEA. It's called the city of ENEA. People, once again, for sharing your reflections and your insights. It's been wonderful, and I appreciate your attention to details. Off now, we're just going to take questions from our Q&A. Our first question is from Veronica. She's saying, good day, Filippo. Do you prefer to work on all the design process by yourself, from sketching and initial ideas to the last phases of the project? Or do you prefer to minimize the team and make as much as possible in the project by yourself?
Yeah, I prefer to minimize the team and make as much as possible by myself. Although that doesn't mean that I don't like to work in teams, but I think that, I mean, the design work, it increases in complexity the more people are involved, the more negotiation you have to do and everything. So I think that one of the key things is to try to understand, but of course, I mean, at the same time, by collaborating, you get more chances, more richness into the project. I really value the value of collaboration. I estimate that. At the same time, I think it's really about the threshold, where you put the threshold. And generally, if you want to have control over the process, you need to minimize the variables within the process. So the smaller the team, the better overall, because the less negotiation, the faster you can go if you have a clear target to pursue. So in that sense, that's also one thing of the product design, which I like, that the teams are smaller and it's easier, the coordination. It's easier to reach something pure, I would say, when there are less negotiations to do.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, thank you for sharing once again. And I hope, Veronica, that Filippo has answered your question. We have our next question. Umayma is saying, amazing. Thank you for wonderfully inspiring talk. I would appreciate your advice for old school architects who want to learn new sea of tools. Any tips on how to start to fit into today's architectural arena?
Look for something that you like, I would say, and try to find, it will take time, of course, but I would say start by learning not what has to be learned, so to speak, but what allows you to do something that you like. Because that's the only way, I think, to get a personality at a certain point. It's really relevant that you pursue something that you like. I know this may sound very generic, but that's how much I see it. And then you grow on that.
Yes.
But you need to have strong foundations, which is about doing something that that's what you're interested in doing, and not something that has to be done or is done to please someone else, or all these kind of things. So the beginning would be to look around, do some research on images or what people say, and start by the thing that you like the most. Like when you find, okay, I think that I really like the images that you can do with this software, so I have a look at it. So that would be my suggestion. And then once you're into that, then you start making steps one by one, and then you learn a tool. Also, when you start doing, you will see that at the beginning it is slow to relatively slow to learn. It can be faster than one thinks, but relatively slow. But then in time, there is a point in which then you go really fast in learning new things and everything, because many software share the same logic, same ideas are behind, the same interfaces are similar, the same processes, the same sensibilities. So yeah, start with something that you like and build on top of that 1 inch at a time.
And patience, it brings us back to patience, more or less. So we have another question from Awab. Awab asks, what are the essential knowledge and skills required by a prospective student interested in applying for the Urban Morphogenesis Master Program?
If the question is strictly about how to be accepted, I'm not reviewing the portfolios, so I'm not 100% sure about what the criteria, but generally it's a combination of the fact that you've been doing something which is as close as possible to the subject of the master, and the fact that it's a nice portfolio. So the thing is that both the urban design and the architectural design master program within the B-Pro at Bartlett are design courses. So the portfolio must be a design portfolio overall. Yeah. So having nice projects that are curated and everything helps. And of course, if you have a bit of background in computation, helps as well. But to be honest, I mean, it depends on who's applying every year, but I see many people that come in without knowledge of computational design, like they learn there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I've just shared actually once again, the link for the Urban Morphogenesis Lab for people's reference. We have a question from Konstantinos. He's asking your favorite software.
I work with a few of them. Generally, most of my workflows are between Rhino Grasshopper and Maya, which are integrated, and I'm teaching mostly Rhino Grasshopper. All my workflows are in Grasshopper all the time. That's because it's good for computational design. It became very flexible, but also for me, it's fundamental that it's integrated within Rhino, which is what architects use. So it would be like also working in an office like Zaha, I need to use softwares that everybody uses. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to interact with other people. Of course, you can do things. Of course, you can interact, but you need to work on a similar pipeline. Then it depends. I used to write code back in the past in processing, and now less. I've been working with Houdini a bit in the last year, because I think that's quite interesting, because it has a lot of stuff incorporated, so it's faster to go, and it's quite powerful. So that's good, but still it cannot be like your own full-on software, I think, if you're doing architecture, like not only experimental, but aiming to deliver projects, because I think it's interesting when you work that you start something. That's also one thing which I do, that is maybe also related to the following question on concept, that I'm working a lot concept centered when I work in the office, which means that I also change the drawing techniques. So maybe I'm working on an idea like erosion, striation, cellular aggregation, and then I try to model options that relate to that concept, but which are also very different. So maybe I start with something Maya model, then I move to a workflow in Grasshopper, then I move to something else, and so on. So generally, if you know how computational design is being taught, or also how you work in master's program, very often there you have very defined pipelines in terms of software and everything and workflow. But when I work within the office in my own design work, I move way more between softwares. Like things are really being processed and transformed and everything. So yeah, the design generally starts with a concept, which is mostly a mood board generally, like a collection of images that relate to a concept, and then you start attempting it. So You make first try in one way, then you try another way, then you find another image that relates to the mood board, and you evolve over time. And through sequences and steps of refinement, you eventually narrow down to something more specific.
I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I tried it myself, and sometimes you focus on working with one program, but at the end you end up working on four, or based on your project's requirements or the design that you're working or that you have in hand. Our last question for the night is from Gary. Gary is asking, do you start your designing with a concept, or what is the one central idea before designing? Interesting.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, I start with a concept generally. I mean, it depends a bit. That would be ideal. Like starting from full scratch, having time, I would start with a concept and develop it. So most of the time, that's the way you do it. Sometimes the conditions are a bit different. Like sometimes, I don't know, I try like, that's a bit different when I work in the office or when I work on more research-oriented projects. Like sometimes in research, you really want to push a specific workflow to the end. So in that case, the project is not concept-driven, but workflow-driven. I know this sounds a bit contradicting with what I said before, but it's just a different type of project. Like, let's say if there is a brief from the client and you need to start approaching it, I would try to understand which would be the concept to work with and develop it. But sometimes if I'm doing a more research project, sometimes I have workflows which I've been trying and everything, and they're not mature enough, and then you try to just make them grow. So you stick within the workflow and you try to more apply it to different things.
Wonderful. Thank you once again, Filippo, for sharing all your wonderful insights. I mean, I thank David for coming in and for making me reunite with such a beautiful mind like yours. Thank you for our audience for bearing with us. Filippo, if you have anything to say before we head off, please go ahead.
Sorry?
If you have anything to say,
thanks a lot. It was fun. Like, it was good to talk. Nice to see you after a few years. And good luck with everything. Thanks for the questions. I hope that was useful, and well, see you soon.
See you soon, hopefully, when everything is all right. I hope you guys are all safe. Filippo, thank you for the 1000th time. And for those of you who are interested to know more about Filippo, I shared the contact information in our chat and our YouTube for your colleagues or for your friends to share. Thank you, Filippo, and have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Bye-bye.